Hi everyone, and welcome to the webinar number 7 for this Udacity Nano degree. We continue our series about Redux today with React-Redux, seeing the benefits of using Connect and Provider. Let me check that all the sound is working. Okay. So first, for starters, what is React-Redux? It's just a library. It's a React library, and it's defined as a user interface bindings library. This means that from one side we have React, and in the other hand we have Redux. They are both simple libraries, but we can use them as we have been using them without other third-party libraries. We began using Redux Tank for middleware, but we can use Redux and React usually out of the box. But using a library that joins both libraries, we get some benefits. Okay, so the reasons for benefits or reasons for using React-Redux are mostly four. First, if you want to use a library that connects React with Redux, this is the official library. It's maintained by the Redux team, so it's supposed to be that the most updated and the most with the most knowledge inside. And the other point is it's predictable. Okay, so it's designed to work with all the components model of React, and this is something that we are going to see. That's being able to componentize and modularize components as we think in React using Redux under the hood is like, okay, I know how to do this. It's the way I usually do things. It's encapsulated. That means it's like you most of the time you don't see the mechanisms working, but below under the hood it creates a wrapper for the components that will manage this integration with our user interface and the store. And of course, it's optimized. One thing. Every time you try to answer why I could use why couldn't I use I could use this way of doing things instead of doing it with React-Redux. Usually, it's because with React-Redux it's optimized, and you are going to you are not going to penalize your application doing it with anti-patterns. It's like. Redux tells you that's the best. You shouldn't put your asynchronous calls in the reducers. That's why we put them in the action creators with the help of our libraries to create asynchronous calls in inside of them. But nothing stops us for creating asynchronous calls inside of reducers. But you will be like going against how Redux is built, and your application will perform badly. So this is the same. As in class, one first part you should understand, and I told you that I would explain it later in the lessons. I know that it's explained in class, so it's the context API. Context API is some magical idea that came up later, at the beginning of last year with the first version of React 16. And remember that you had okay, if you want to manage state, you can manage state with React state or with Redux or other libraries Redux alike. But if you want to use, but if you don't want to use Redux, managing state in React would become very complex. And context API comes to fill this gap where you have to pass multiple times your states, and imagine, a theme UI, or user preferences like language or something like that, and all the components have to be using them. And you want to have it in React. You don't have that many data that needs to go into Redux. And so here you can have the context API that lets you declare, it has two parts, a provider and context. It lets you declare a provider with some data in a parent component, like above in the application, and later any child components without passing the props with context, with the part of this the second part of the context API. You can grab any value you had in that provider. So when we studied the React developer tools, we were watching a Hello World application that had some routing on it, and we saw that when we added the React router, we were adding a provider component, and that was why we have available like the location, the history, and all these kind of methods that come from the API, from the library. So this is a very nice tool. It's used in a lot of libraries. Remember that every time we had the rule that if you have to pass down a prop more than two times, or two children down, you should go to Redux. Context API comes to, okay, you don't have to go to Redux. You can go leave it in Context API. And that's why nowadays applications don't have lots of state in Redux, because with Context API, with GraphQL, and a little of Redux, you can manage more things than before that we had to put everything in Redux. But the main reason we explain Context API here is because it's used by Redux itself inside. So let's see an example of Context API. Okay. Sorry. So for following this project, we are going to continue. We have like two repositories: the Hello World code and another code that we had, like the page with. Let me check if I have it here. Localhost. I didn't get any. Oh, I don't have it starting now. Yeah, the application with for React State versus React Redux State webinar, where we had a header with the invoices, the indexes, Thanos, and these kind of things, and the user profile. So that example is the same we are going to use for adding all the things now. Because it had like some things left without doing properly, and at the end, the starting point here, if you want to see like the end of that project, would be the branch refactoring one. Okay, but for now, and as always, we have in the branch where we're going to do things. See that in refactoring one, we would be having the old code, and in context dash API is the code that we are going to be using right now. So first, remember we had something like this, like we had in the app components, we had like the route, and we were rendering the items and the invoices, and we added everything in Redux. So we didn't have to pass it as props. And inside the components, we were using things with retrieving components from gets for the store. This is important that we are always importing the store, and it's not nice. It's not nice for this kind of dynamic data, dynamic content, and also because another thing you are going to see at the end is that with Context API and with React-Redux, we can access things as this without passing the props from the parent, like having the calls for the components like this one. But inside, we would be having also the props and accessing with them, so we can modularize our components. So we can like create prop types and understand and document well our components without like, okay, understanding all the time, oh yeah, I have to get a state from the store, and what was the state? Maybe I'm doing a little component, I am new at the company, I'm new at this code, I'm learning, and you pass me a little example where, okay, you're going to receive in these props the username and the avatar, and you don't have to do anything more, just do the HTML, the CSS, and the basic view, and you don't have to understand how the store is created. First, let's see the 4 main points of Context API. We have first the React.create context. This is the function that creates the context object. That is the initial part of Context API. And this means that once we do this, React subscribes to this context object. Okay, React will say, okay, now I subscribe to the changes to this context. Okay, this is from this. You have as always the resources at the end of the presentation, and is where you see that it's from the official Context API definition. It says that it will read the current context value from closest matching provider above industry. This means we have another part that it's the provider. Okay, the context.provider, as you see, it accesses the value prop. So this means that is the value that's all the descendants that of this provider will be able to access to this property. And also it's important that all consumers that are descendants of this provider will re-render whenever the provider's value prop changes. And as before in the create context definition, we are telling that React creates a subscription for this component. So in every component that we want to access to this provider value will be re-rendered every time that this value changes, and it's also not subject to the should component update. So if you have a should component update that says that that component shouldn't be updated from the internals of React, it doesn't mean that if it's in its context and it's in its parent provider, it needs to be updated because the value of the parent provider is changed. It will be updated even that should component update says no. Okay. Context type is just a class property. As you can see here, like dot context type, that lets you access context inside the class with this dot context. It's just a help, a utils function so a property that it's nice to know it. But the important thing here is the context.consumer. So as you see, we have the started create context for creating the context. After that, through that context object, we have the context.provider and the context.consumer. In this case, is my context, the instantiation of the context. We have the provider that gets, it's the parent with the value inside, and context consumer see that requires a function as a child. That is the thing that is inside the value. I think it's here. It's missing the parentheses for being a function, where you have like, okay, that function receives the current context value and returns the React code. Okay, so and every time we wrap our code or our component or the part of the component we want to be that access, we want to access the provider value, would be subscribed to those changes we talked before. So now we can go and see in action these changes. So remember, we had before the app.js, and what I'm doing here is, okay, I'm wrapping up. Let's see, this is the code where we are. I'm wrapping my app with Redux context provider and passing it the value store. Okay, so as you see, I want to add context before. Okay, that the idea was I want to access in the invoices example as before the property, the store. This is why we've been here. Before accessing the store with context, we have to add the store in the provider. So that's why we come to the app and we wrap the app with the Redux provider. So all the app will be available for this provider, and for this Redux context provider, and we will be able to access a store value because we want to have it global. You see, this Redux context is just something that it comes from a component I created, a folder I created that is context and index.js, and we just create, okay, we import React, we call React create context, we call it Redux context, and we export it as default. So now every time we need it, we just import it because we have to have it available in the parent and in every child. In the classroom example, it's the same, but because it's in the same file, you don't get to export it and to access it for different files. So if you see here, it's the old function render, and now is the new function render. We just add a higher order component, and it's the Redux context. It's between browser, router, and app. We could have wrapped browser, router also, but I think it's better that more specific. That okay, I want to be app the one that accesses this store. Now is where things gets nice. Now for accessing the store, we see that we are in invoices, and we just don't have to. The call. I didn't add the call for where we instantiate this class because it doesn't change. We don't pass any prop. Here we have the props, but it's just for no props are passed right now, and it's null. But you see, we import the Redux context. We now are able to access it because we are wrapping our component. See, we have two returns. Okay, my functional component returns a Redux context consumer that has a function that receives the store, it accesses the store, and inside of it returns the React node. So that's why now we can access the invoices pages for username, and that username is the structured from the store get state. As you can see, we access it from where we want. This means we have to wrap our component with an extra code, but see that it's nicer to have this kind of code that passing all around the props, no, from parent to child, parent to child, father to child, and this is this is the first example for Context API, and why now we would be able to access the store and every part of our application. Remember that Context API is more it's from React library. You don't have to add any external library, and it's not only for passing the store, it's for passing anything you need in your application. I recommend it to use in every project you have, because it's awesome. Now we go to this has, you will see that this has this Context API we created. And when we move into the React-Redux library, it has its sibling that it's the provider, like the provider from that library. But first, we need to go to the connect, okay? Because we managed to create to access the store or the state from the store from every component without having to passing around or things like that. But also we need to get to the context for each component. That it's a lot of code. That's one part. And we still need to manually subscribe to a component. Remember that in the index.js of our application, we have that render and the store subscribe from the render. If you were in the view, we would be subscribing in the component mount and subscribe it in the component will mount. So these things are like, oh, maybe there is a library that's managed this for me. And as I say, always with optimization in mind, always with less code to write. So we are going to the branch adding connect. This means to add the library. Okay. So as always, as in the case before, we have the to watch a little about the API. I always recommend you, or I don't know if I recommend it too much or too little, to read through the APIs, because sometimes it's like a lot of information, but just go to a little part of the documentation and read through it, because once your eyes get used to reading APIs and official documentation, you don't need this kind of videos, or you won't need lots of Medium tutorials or blogs. You just will understand things out of the box and leave the reading and the tutorials for advanced things. Okay. So yeah, what does connect? Connects React components with Redux. Okay. So, and lets us access those parts of the state of Redux state as component props. So that's why I told you, wow, wouldn't it be nice to be able to access a state, Redux state, whenever we want, without having to pass it parent to child, father to child, or parent to children, or things like this, and also being as component props, so we keep with the React way of doing things. That's where Connect comes into play. Connect, it's a function that gets a maximum of four arguments, and later that function is applied to a component. we are going to see the two first arguments. If you want more arguments, just go to the official documentation. It's in the link. So first, as you see, we have the export default connect. Open parentheses. We have map state to props. First argument. Second argument, map dispatch to props. Second argument, and it's applied to a component. What means this? Once applied to the component, and the component which we want to connect to Redux, we don't modify it, or React-Redux doesn't modify that component class. Instead, it returns a new copy, a new component, but it's a new connected component, okay, that wraps inside that component. And just makes a wrapper that connects to Redux and gives you inside the component. Okay. So first argument is map state to props. If you pass this argument, the component will subscribe to the Redux store updates. Okay, if you want to be subscribed to the Redux updates, usually you would. But if you don't want, you just pass null as first argument, first parameter. You connect it to the component, to that component to Redux, but you will be able to access the Redux store, but you won't be reactive to the changes. Okay, but if you pass it, you will be subscribed. So every time our store is updated, that function will be called. And this function is just a function that will return a plain object. And this plain object will be merged into the component's props. So if the component has 2 or 3 props, and in that function we just add another prop, and we had 3. Now the component has 4 props, and they are all the same, and we can't access the same. We access all of them the same way. We can apply the prop types. We can apply TypeScript wherever. So think about it. It's just a function that returns an object that are the props, the properties we want to add to that component. Just like that. Of course, this function can get until 2 arguments. The first argument is the state, because every time will be called whenever the state or the store state changes. It's nice to have the state inside the function, because usually you want to access, I want to pass as prop the state.username, the state.avatar, the state. Email, whatever. So usually you need to pass it. And on props is map state to props will be called when the wrapper component receives new props. Okay, so this is like if you pass them, will be updated when it receives also new props, right? So only not when the state changes, also when the process changes. And that's why see that it depends on if only on the state change or in both. Every time the state changes and the new properties appear. And that's why passing this function subscribes our component to the store. If we just pass null, it doesn't change when it's not called when state is changed, and it's not called when new props come into play. So it's not updated. The second argument, it's map dispatch to props. Okay, usually it's like map dispatch to props. Yeah, see that everything is to props. You have everything available as props, and the first part is what it's available as props, and this is the dispatch method. So we are able, in simple words, if in the first function we were able to add Redux store state properties as component properties, now we can add Redux actions or action creators as functions or properties for the component. Okay. May either be an object, a function, or not supplied. Your component will receive dispatch by default when you do not supply a second method to connect. Okay. Yeah. If you don't add this function, you always will have dispatch. This means that if you only have if you just want to connect something to Redux, you just add connect. No map state to props, no map dispatch to props, and the component. That component has access to the store, but no properties. But yeah, one prop is passed, that is the dispatch method. Okay, and we have always two arguments, the dispatch. You see, so we can be able to access the dispatch function. And this is the unprops. Always it's recalled if we pass the unprops. It's recalled whenever or invoked whenever the connected component receives new props. See this? Now we are declaring the internal functions or functions as props. So this .props.afunc. I don't like to use full bar, so I usually a function or a func. This is the internal name that will appear in a function that doesn't receive. This is not proper. Oh, sorry. This is not proper. That unprop symmetry. We don't need this. That would be empty, because this is empty. I will have to check it from the doc. Let me props dot some attributes. Okay. So now once we took a look to it, little, no? Or every time you need something bigger, go to the docs. But this is a reinforcement class where we don't want to go more than for advanced things, or at least the ones I talk with you every week. Let me know. Don't go with advanced things or with advanced React things. Just keep into the Udacity content. So I don't want to make big examples. So now is the time that we can add the React-Redux library. After half an hour, we start adding it, and we go to the example with the to the invoices example, and see if we want to access this .props username, and that's not this props. It's props. In the code it's nice. This .props username, because see, it's a functional component, so we just pass it as an argument. So this would be props. This is why I make changes in the code, and later I don't record to come here. So to access it, we import connect from React-Redux, and we export invoices, but wrapped with the connect function. And before this map state to props, we can't create an external function, but we can create inline. We have the state as first parameter, so every time the state is changed, this function will be re-invoked, so the view will be re-rendered, and we get the property name. The component of our function property name that we're going to use is equal to state.username. So now, once we do this, we are able to access that. Now it's easier. We don't have to do the get store and the structure. We just have it inside of here. Okay, that's nice, but if we would be going to the view right now, we would see that this is nice, but it doesn't work. Why? That's why it doesn't work. I give you 10 seconds to think about why it wouldn't be working right now. Because we added half of what is added in React-Redux. We added the part of connect that connects Redux, that component, to Redux. Like we are using the consumer part of the context API here, but we aren't using. We haven't told React to add the state to the library provider. So we have like now in the code like the context API provider, the context API context consumer, and now we added the connect, but we are connecting the children, but we aren't using the connect from the library. So that's why it doesn't work. Okay. So now we have to make the changes. We have to make the changes like okay, before we were using the browser Redux context provider around context provider. Now we import the provider from React-Redux, and the only thing we have to change is of course the name. Now it's provider, and instead of value equal store, we just pass store equal store. Okay, that's why how it works in Redux. We can delete the context folder. We can't remove that import, and now everything works. And another thing we have nice here is that we don't need to store subscribe render. Now once we do this and it's inside the provider, the library subscribes and does its internals for us, subscribes, and that is where you get the boost optimization. So now our examples will be like better, the provider accessing things. Okay, so now we can finish things. Okay, the branch map dispatch to props. Now see, we can get rid of this now because we were accessing until now with we had like we had the state, username, the username, and this part I didn't show it to you before, but we still have this in the code because we added the context API. We just remove it. And see, it's like, okay, from before, we get to this, the code I showed you, okay? Less code. We just don't have to do the context API wrapper that, besides that, it's very, very nice library for React if we are using it for Redux. And Redux can use things with, React-Redux can use things like this and recreate our props like this. It's quite less code. Another improvement is like now we can create add prop types library, import it, and create like, okay, now my component will have will be able to specify that, okay, this component will receive a property called username that is a string and it's required for this view to work. See that now it's solved this dot props and it's changed into props. And because we are using the connect, also people will understand that these prop types come from Redux, because if you see 5 prop types, you see that the one called username is also in the map state to props. In username, you say, okay, I understand that these are the props that will be received by the component, so I know where I'm dealing with this. We are modularizing our code. We don't have to know everything. We don't have to know everything that works. We can begin to work with these components, but also we can understand that it's using Redux, what comes from Redux and what comes from React parent as prop. Also, if we had some part where we would be using context API for React state, also we would be understanding that what comes from React context, because we would see the function in the callback. So these are the really, really nice things where you get the knowledge and the power of using libraries that are simple, that makes us work better. I think with this, if you went through the coding class, would be the same. Like they create the context API, they create this, but this is with an ongoing application, refactoring it with the errors and everything. I think that with both examples, you should be like more than good to go, understanding why we use React-Redux, why we access things with context API, why we connect things, why we create map state to props, and everything like that. One last thing for working. It's like until now we have seen like how we access the state Redux state as a component prop. But if we go to the user profile page in our example, we will see that also we use there the stores. We need to access some properties, but also we were dispatching some actions. So it's nice to see the second arguments for connect, that it's map dispatch to props. And you're going to be using this a lot in the projects. Okay. So now if we go to the user profile and we go to the on submit, that component had a lot of code, so just wanted to show the important part. And we go to the end of the on submit function. We had like a call for store get, where store dispatch action. Now we want to use like this props set user profile. Like if it were a normal function passed as props, we can destructure it here or just access it with this dot props. But how we make it accessible is now we have to connect and we have to pass it a second argument. Now because we would be creating two functions, I just decided to give the global example with the functions created separately with the names, so you can see like better organization. First, in this user profile, we are going to access username here, username and new avatar are the structure in the code, so they come also from the props, because map state to props is here. It's a function that receives a state, so every time a state changes, all the component will be re-rendered. We didn't pass the second argument on props, so it's not re-rendered when it receives new props. And it makes available to the as props for the component, the username and the avatar that they come from the state. And now we pass the second function, that it's map dispatch to props. It receives the dispatch function. Remember that it's available even if we don't pass this function or the dispatch. We would be able to use this dispatch, this props dispatch, whatever. But we can make it better. We can create our functions available. It's not as important. You can make you can make all your code work with map state to props and use inside the code this props dispatch, import the actions and dispatch them from there. just this kind of wrappers. People like them, and people don't like them. You are in your, so here you create, okay, what this function is that I'm declaring as a prop is a set user profile name. So this is what it will be called. We'll receive these two arguments, and what it will be doing will be dispatching the set user profile. This is the action that should be imported here, and passing these arguments received. It's just a short way of calling them. But you know, a lot of people doesn't do this and just creates these dot props dot dispatch, and inside set user profile, username, new avatar. It depends on how you prefer it. It's up to you. Okay, so now we are finished. As I promised, I would be keeping the webinar shorter because not much of you come into the live streaming, so that should be 1 hour if you interact with questions wherever. So because you know there isn't much to do with this part without going further, just if someone has questions about what we see, what we saw. I will check. Give you a minute. Okay, no questions there. As always, I leave you here some resources. React-Redux GitHub page, React-Redux documentation page that are related from there. The Connect API official API and the Connect Context API docs, and a nice hangout where Dan Abramov talks around for 50 minutes about React-Redux, and for sure explains it better than me. So that's it. Okay, remember, now we are in the week of, we have like all this month to create the project, the second project, and this is the most difficult one. So write in the Slack group, in direct message me, book any calendar one-on-one virtual call, and wherever you need. Okay, so thank you for attending. See you next week and talk you through Slack. Thank you for attending this webinar, and stay audacious. Bye.